Okay. So, hi, once again. I'm Praxilla Taurina. I'm in the Kingdom of Artemisia. This is planning a picnic feast or day board. Um, I know a lot of this is probably going to be a little bit different in your kingdom if you live somewhere else. So hopefully we'll have some discussion about that. I'm going to kind of present you my my take on things, my experience with it, and I would love to hear other people's take and experience once we get going. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. If you would rather not do that, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. We can take some breaks as we go through here because mostly like I said, this is going to be kind of a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of a lecture, a little bit of, hey, this worked for me. What do you guys think? So we'll go with that. I am, once again, like I said, I'm in the Kingdom of Artemisia. I have been playing since 91. I've been playing pretty heavily for about the last 12 years. I live at the very bottom of the organized part of my kingdom. I live in a very small kingdom numerically, but a very large kingdom geographically. Artemisia takes 10 hours to drive up to some of our groups from where I live easily. 3 or 4 hours is considered a day trip. So we often have some interesting things that need to happen with our feasts that don't necessarily happen other places. So we'll get going with the next slide. So me and my motivation for putting together these sorts of things. If you see this lovely picture here, this is a site in my local area. It is the Provo, Utah Castle Amphitheater, and there are these gorgeous turrets. There's an amazing amphitheater. There's stairs for the fighters to fight on. There's this gorgeous grassy field in front of it. It's a beautiful site. It is rarely camped on, but we can camp on it. Mostly people just kind of come, enjoy the grass, have some fun, and hang out. And as a result, this is also just up at the top of Center Street in Provo, so it's very easily accessible. So part of the reason people don't camp is they can go home. But lunch, this is the perfect place to have a gorgeous picnic lunch because we have just this fabulous background and gorgeous lawn, and therefore picnic sounds perfect. And I've done that about the last 3 years. Overall, I've cooked about 9 feasts total. There for a while I was doing 2 a year. Normally our Toys for Tots in November, and then something for either this in the summer, or we have a spring event that is normally it's mystery, and it's a themed event where we have a mystery that needs to be solved, and it changes from year to year. So I get to do some really fun events. They've been absolutely a joy to do. Part of my kingdom culture, as I said before, is a little different than I know other places. As I said, we don't have huge numbers, so we are not going to be having feasts of 300 and 400 and 500 because we don't have that kind of turnout. When you only have a population of more like 600 or 700 people, you just don't have those numbers. So our feasts are normally smaller. 80 to 100 is huge. You're going to get more like 50 to 60 people. And the great thing about afternoon lunches is we get bigger turnout than we would get for the regular feast. But what's tended to happen the last couple of years, for finances and other reasons, we've had a lot of potluck lunches and burger burns, and I wanted to make sure that when people came to my rather small area at the bottom of the kingdom, they had an opportunity for something a little bit more historical. As a feast steward, I rarely have more than 2 or 3 people to help, sometimes 5 or 6, but I don't have a big staff. So prepping things is huge for me. Having things ahead of made ahead of schedule makes it so I don't want to die by the end of the night. I often have a second job at the event. I've been our local exchequer for about 3 years. Previous to that, I was often some other officer or event steward or in charge of classes or something else. So quite frequently, I could not be in the kitchen all day, which was another reason to have something that I could prep and have out there. So one of the big, so as I just told you a lot of what goes on with me at an event, those are some of the things that I think are important for planning your feast. First of all, what are your circumstances? Do you have a primitive site where you don't have a setup? Do you have a kitchen that you're familiar with? Do you have no kitchen? Do you need to bring everything in? Is it really close to where you are? Are you going to have to travel with things? If you're going to have to travel 2 hours away to bring your food, that makes a lot of a difference as opposed to, oh, well, I'm 20 minutes from home. I can run and grab something if I need it, or we run out, or things like that. Where are you serving is another big question. A lot of the picnics and stuff obviously are going to be served out of tents and pavilions, or and those make a lot of difference than an on-site kitchen. It makes a huge makes a huge difference to the choices you make. Another one that you have to think about when you're doing the outdoor feast, the picnic feasts, what's your weather going to be like? Because that makes a big difference on what kind of foods you can serve and what kind of foods you want to serve. Cold foods are great in June and July, but if it's October and you're outside and it's going to be windy and terrible, you're going to want warmer foods. You're going to want things that are going to fill people up and keep them warm. We're also going to talk a little bit about food safety when we get to it, because, well, we're going to talk more than a little bit about food safety, because I think food safety, especially in this kind of circumstance where you are serving outdoors, you are serving pre-prepared, food safety is key. Making sure that you have kept your cold things cold, your hot things hot, making sure that you are sanitizing, making sure that you are cleaning, making sure that your hands, especially when you're letting people just pick things up, that your hands are clean, but so are theirs, that your utensils are clean, that things are getting disposed of correctly, that you're circulating your food so it doesn't sit out too long. These are all incredibly important things, and we'll continue talking about them throughout that, because it's one of my thumping drums. Your food for a picnic feast should taste good at a range of temperatures. If it tastes fabulous hot, but you're not going to be able to serve it hot, you need to be aware of that. You need to know that it's going to taste okay, sort of lukewarm. It's going to taste okay after it's sat for a few minutes. It's going to taste okay after it's been pulled out of the cooler and isn't quite as cold. It's going to be something that people are going to enjoy. One of the best compliments I ever got from my children was when I had done a bunch of chicken thighs up. And my kids aren't always big on eating chicken off the bone, but there was one of my feasts where I made chicken thighs on the bone. They were cold, and when I was doing my test bit, they were gone like that, because the kids really enjoyed them, and I knew that was a winner. So those sorts of things are things you should keep in mind. You want to make sure that your serving utensils and the types of food that you are serving are going to be conducive to being easy to clean and sanitize. You're not going to want a lot of, while sauces are great, you probably don't want to have everything in the sauce. You probably want to keep those separate so that you can control the drips and the spills and people fishing through through things to find stuff. Again, you want to be able to move small portions and keep them rotating so that you don't have messes that are drawing. Again, these are things with your outside messes drawing things like flies and bugs and such things like that. Another important part of picnics is portion control. Making sure that your portions are easy to serve. That the thing that I found best is to make sure that if I'm not going to do something like serve a chicken thigh or something that people can just pick up and have that one discrete object, I want to make sure that my meats are cut up into chunks or shredded or otherwise done so that people aren't having to try to balance cutting and serving, so that it's something that they can pull in easily. Also making sure that, one, because it makes it easier for them to eat it. Two, because it makes it so that they can know that, well, if it's separated into this hand pie, they should get one of those, and at least on this turn through the line, as opposed to piling their plate full of everything. Again, making sure that your stuff is easy to restock so that you can just pull it, put it. For me, because I normally have 3 other things that I'm doing, which is not ideal, but I want to make sure that I can easily restock things so that it continues and people have availability throughout the amount of time that they are being served, so that it's not everything came out, the first 5 people got food and no one else had the opportunity. Picnics and day boards, again, need to be easy for eaters to handle. Things that are either handheld, put on sticks, or other single serving options. Hand pies are great. Things like cooking small quiches or whatever in muffin containers or things like that. Another thing that I found especially important with outdoor feasts and day board things is to make sure when people are not sitting down, make sure that there are drink options, even if it's just big coolers of water. I normally like to, if I can, add some drinking options. I really like doing things like either a water with citrus or lemonade. Rosewater lemonade goes over big for me, but make sure that you have multiple options of things for people to drink so that they're not getting dehydrated. Also, the more they're drinking, the less they're eating. So it cuts down on your numbers as far as making sure that you can afford to have a good layout. Because these afternoon feasts and day boards tend to have a lower budget than evening feasts. Are there any questions so far? Yes? Nope. Okay. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is looking at historical methods of food preparation. Things like smoking meats, drying meats. I just took a class back in April on making prosciutto, and it's been so much fun, and I desperately want to try it because I made a bunch. It didn't last long in my house. It got eaten pretty quickly. But I really am excited to try some of that and get to serve it. The basic recipe was based off a duck breast, and we did it with chicken, and super fun. And I am all about trying some of those sorts of things, but also dehydrated fruits, dried apricots, dried raisins, things like that. Things that are pretty much shelf stable. Pickles, all kinds of pickles. I like to pickle. I know not everyone enjoys it, but I really very much enjoyed pickling. I love making sauerkraut. I love making pickled beans and pickled cauliflower and playing around with brining and playing around with all those things. And I've really enjoyed making those things ahead of time and serving them. And they're great because you can put them in small bowls, and they're going to be okay in an hour, as opposed to a lot of other options. Pickled eggs. I have never actually eaten a pickled egg. People tell me about them all the time, and I admit to being a little bit, but I'm going to have to give it a shot because I've heard nothing but great things about them. Putting things in honey or sugar, so things like candied orange peel, various fruits in honey, lots of options that way, lots of recipes that you'll find in various cookbooks that way. Whey preservation is fun to try. Ooh, a pickled beet egg. I love pickled beets. Pickled beets are my favorites. Okay, well, you guys have convinced me. I definitely need to try doing some pickled eggs. Try some and try eating some because I really enjoy it. Yeah, people probably would not eat a whole pickled egg. And that's the other thing with your regular pickles too, is making sure that you have, you cut them down, one, because they'll go farther that way, two, because that way people can try a little bit and it doesn't get wasted and thrown away. I did pickled grapes last. I have a huge number of grapes in my backyard, and I was doing grape chutneys, and I do raisins, and I do grape juice, and I do all kinds of piments and things like that with them. But I had never tried pickled grapes, and I made them last year, and I made them. They were they smelled great because they use like cloves and those sorts of, and cinnamon and stuff. And I was like a little hesitant about it, but I made them and I was going to try them, and I never got around to it. But I pulled them out the other night and I had some with the prosciutto I had just made, and it was amazing. And so I'm going to start forcing those upon people to try the pickled grapes. Use ice. I'm going to say this 5 or 6 or 10 more times, but making sure that you have sufficient ice to keep your cold is incredibly important with this. Also, making sure that you have covers for your coolers so that they stay in the shade, incredibly important. Making sure that you know things are really staying at the things. Ooh, whey preserved salmon sounds fabulous. I've been playing around with that. I started making I make cheese. I mean, most of us do, but I hadn't done a lot with the whey, and I started playing with that a few months ago, and doing some of the whey cheese the brown cheese made with that, and the sweetness, and it's more like caramel, and then playing with actually creating whey on purpose, and how much that is such a Norse thing to do, and so many options for that. And I went down a small rabbit hole, and I'm going to get deeper down it because the whey preservation has been hugely fun. So I'm just really starting to look at recipes for that. So whey preserved salmon sounds fabulous. Multiple coolers with various needs and timings. So making sure that these are things that most of us are doing when we're camping anyway, but making sure that if something needs to be used later in the day, you are not opening it 5 times before then. And so that you are staggering, you are planning. That's really the key to any feast, as anyone who's done one can tell you, is making sure that you have your notebook, you know your recipes, even if and most of that stuff may have already happened before with these sorts of things where you've already cooked everything before, but still having your schedules, your timing, and the ability to go back in and look at your recipes if someone has a question. Having your ingredients list posted, always important, but also having it so that you can, if there was a question you weren't prepared for, having your documents with you, having your timing with you, knowing what you're going to do in this 15-minute section, in this 30-minute section, in this hour section, so that you have a plan. And where most of these sorts of things are previously made and you're more concerned with maintaining temperature, maintaining serving options, it is still something that you want to have a plan for. Prepping and freezing things, I can't say that enough. I know this is a really, I don't know if it's a weird one or not. I think I probably get it from my mom who did catering and would always, freeze the cakes before she iced them, because that's what you do to make sure that they're solid and stable, but also so that they retain moisture. So when I cook my breads, I freeze them. Even if I've made them, 2 days before or a day before, I still freeze them. So because it maintains a little bit more moisture rather than them drying out. And that's just one of those things that I personally do. Plus it gives more area that's cold. But yeah, prepping and freezing and making sure that your foods are at the temperature you want them to be before you toss them in a cooler. I know that's doesn't sound like something you should have to remind somebody, but I've had to remind people before that you can't put a hot item into a cooler and expect it to cool down. You can't put a cold item in an area and expect it to warm up. You want to make sure that your temperatures are controlled before you put them where you're going to put them for storage. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing your recipes, when you're practicing before, when you're testing things out, looking at how things are going to hold up in heat and outside. Does it discolor? Will your salad greens wilt? How are they going to look? I mean, sure, they might be safe, but brown apples are still not going to be something somebody's going to want. So be aware of those sorts of things. Because again, weather, bugs, and otherwise are things that you're going to have to worry about with this sort of venue as opposed to an indoor feast. Have thermometers. Have more than one. Make sure you're being safe. Make sure that you are making certain that your food is not becoming a breeding ground and you're going to food poison someone. That's the last thing you want to do. We don't want people sick. Therefore, be aware of what's going on, because you don't have control of your outdoor temperature. You don't necessarily have control of things like the wind. You don't have control of, what's being blown onto your serving area. So try to take some precautions against that. Make sure that you have things like extra utensils when one gets thrown on the grass or the ground, keeping things covered, keeping things, it's a lot nicer when you can pull out the rest of the bag of something and reset that because something's, a plate got knocked to the ground by the wind. We have a lot of wind issues. But have your thermometers, have more than one so that you can monitor what's going on with your food. Have sanitizing solutions available and use them. Don't just have, because I've seen this happen, don't just have, your bin with your bleach solution with your cloths in it that's sitting there prominently wonderful that never gets used. Use those. Wipe things down. Keep things clean. I know I'm harping on this. It's just such a big deal. We don't want to make people ill. Have hand washing options for diners, especially in some of these, more primitive areas where it's not as big of a deal. But especially because in most of these cases, people are serving themselves. Make sure they're not, infecting others. So make sure you have hand washing options for your diners. Lots and lots of cloths, lots and lots, more than you think you're going to need. The worst thing in the world is to get there and have like, well, I have a roll of paper towels and that's going to have to do. Have options. Lots of serving utensils. Make sure that everything has a serving utensil, and then you have backups, because inevitably what happens, it happens, wherever, if people are serving themselves and there isn't a utensil, or the utensil gets moved and doubled up somewhere else, they're going to start pulling utensils from other places, and you're going to end up with cross-contamination. And again, you don't want that. You want people to know that the food that you're serving them is safe. Plenty of trash bags and cleaning supplies, and having a cleanup plan, having that as part of your notebook, where you know how these things are going to get off site. You have options for your leftovers. You have people involved. It's the same sort of thing as if you were doing an indoor feast, where you're keeping track of, doing dishes, and you have that set up. But you have to, again, think a little further out, because you don't necessarily have all the ability to do what you would do in an area that's already set up to cook in. Let's see. Okay, so I really like doing feasts that have themes and are fun, because I like playing silly games. So matching your event theme is great. If you can have a time and a place, awesome. But you have other options as well. You can also make your food work with the story if you've chosen not to use a specific recipe collection. I do a lot of, like I said before, I do a lot of cooking for our Toys for Tots annual fundraiser event in November. And that is a super, super fabulous event. And I love it to death. It's my favorite event. But it is also incredibly kid-friendly, and it needs to be kid-friendly. It's expected to be kid-friendly. We also, if we're very, very lucky, will have the Marines show up and be there as part of our guests. So we have a variety of people that are not necessarily adventurous eaters, that are excited about this amazing experience of this recipe that they've now been educated on. They don't really like it, but they think it's really cool that they got to taste it. I love doing those. Those are super fun for like cook stays and such, but that doesn't work for this particular feast. So with that particular feast, I tend to do a story. And I've got an example of that a little bit later. I'll show you a slide of one of those particular ones. So that's also an option if you're not going, just as another way to organize it, if you're not able to just go, well, I'm cooking from Apicius, or we're going to do a 16th century Tudor feast. You have other options as well to still keep things together. What's your expected attendance? Because that's going to be a big deal. Again, like I said, I have been our local exchequer for the last several years, which has one great advantage when planning a feast, is I know what the numbers were from last year. I know how many people showed up previous year. So get a hold of that information. Find out how many people are going to be there. Make some big plans. We don't tend to do reservations at our area. So people like exotic food, not weird food. You're absolutely right. That is definitely a better way to phrase it. What does your budget look like? Again, these afternoon feasts tend to be a lesser budget. What is the event schedule? There should be a T there. What does the event schedule look like? That's something that you're going to have to play with a little bit more with an afternoon or a day board, is looking at where people are, because it's not we will serve this in this 15-minute block. It's more, we're going to be serving through this 2 or 3 hour point so that people can come and go. Rapiers doing this. Thrown weapons is happening here. There's a class over here, or we're serving this at a collegium and we have some lunch breaks, so we need to have it available there. So what does your event schedule look like? That makes, in this case, a huge difference on what you can serve, on what foods you want to look at, making sure that they're takeable, that you can take them. It also makes, you know, a difference as far as how long you have to be able to serve this to make sure that everyone has an opportunity at it. And also, what other sources of food are nearby? That's a big one in my kingdom. We have a lot of people who will go off-site and grab burgers for lunch, or not stay for feast. It's just a big thing in my area for some reason. I don't know if we had a lot of bad feasts in the past, and people are kind of shy about it. But I've never had. I've been lucky enough that people want to eat my feasts, and I've had people that travel specifically to eat my feasts. So, but that is something that I have to consider, is making sure that if there's a lot of other options, that it might cut down on how many people are going to want to eat in the afternoon. So this is a feast I did last year at that site I was talking about, the castle. I did, let's see, more chats. Well, yeah, a lot of people, we don't even get 150 people to events. So like I said, we have a much smaller population. And we have a lot of people who just don't want to stay. It's just part of the kingdom culture. We're trying to fix it, and we've had some success in some places and other not so much. But no, we normally have a hard time getting people to eat feasts, not turning them away, unfortunately. Yep, drive home, absolutely, because that's the thing, is when you're driving 10 hours or you're driving 5 hours, or because we have a lot of, like I said, 3 and 4 hours is a day event. It's a day trip. So you finish the event and you still have 3 hours to drive home, 5 hours to drive home. So it's just part of our kingdom culture that way. Yeah, we also have the thing where people change their mind and leave early. So I try to make whatever it is I'm cooking sort of a reason to be there. And that's also one reason that for us, an afternoon feast sometimes works better. We get better turnout because people can eat that and still know that they can go home, as opposed to, oh geez, it's 8 o'clock. I still got 5 hours. I have to go. I can't stay for this. But this is what I did last year. The theme of it was a castle siege, was what the theme of the event was. And I thought it would be super fun because, well, my device is a flying pig. Well, my badge is a flying pig. And I was thinking about I was learning about what the fact that those sorts of statements are called adenata. And I was like, okay, that's a thing. And I found out it is a thing. It's a thing. And there's even examples of them, Plutarch. So it is totally a thing where you have this giant bits of hyperbole that are so crazy they're impossible. So I went with the idea, we're having a siege, it's impossible to get in. So I themed the feast that way, as an impossible feast, based on various cultures, various fun ideas of things that were impossible. And then I made all of my dishes match. So we did when pigs fly, when hens have teeth, when calves are dancing on the ice, when wallflowers grow on the willow tree, when the moon turns to green cheese, when grapes grow on the willow tree, if the sky falls, we shall catch larks, when frogs grow hair, when the reed plant blooms, when an owl's tail blooms, when it snows red snowflakes, when the pig wears yellow slippers and dances in the pear tree. And some of these are a little bit more modern than others, but I tried to not pick, anything really, really super glaring. But what I went through is I went through various impossible statements from cultures, and I tried to match up things that would be fun to eat with them.
Hey, Brian, it's Bobby Drabick. Hey, Bobby. How are you? I'm good. How are you? Okay. I'm having a hard time getting into Google Classroom.
Hi.
And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Oh, my phone is about to die, but I think
Okay.
So when I press,
so anyway, that was the general idea. Was I was going with something that would be fun and silly and get people talking at lunch, and still give them a food that would work under my other circumstances. So I knew I had not any on-site facilities. I had basically a couple of burners to make sure that I had hot water, and that was about it. Limited preparation because I needed to sit gate, and so I could have someone sit gate for a while, but I wasn't going to have all day to have this prepped. I needed it clean up again because I needed to serve lunch and then be able to get back to what I was doing, and serving over an extended time to allow for the rapier, the archery, the thrown weapons, and our heavy schedule, which we're all going through the afternoon. But also it's a smaller site, in area, it's all kind of compressed, so people would be walking through. So those are the sorts of things I kept in mind when I planned this particular feast, and made sure that I had my ingredients list and that it was posted and people were aware, and I went with that. And it was a fun one. People enjoyed it. I think we had some weather issues, so we had some rain going on, but it was a fun one to do. It was a little unusual, like I said, because it wasn't based on I'm cooking in a particular time and place. But it gave people something to talk about while they, munched their various foods. Another one I did was this Cretan lunch where we did sweet cheese pies, because again, hand pies are fabulous for having before. I personally am gluten-free. I'm gluten intolerant, and so I can cook with it, but I'm not going to be eating it. So I make sure that I have options. I also tend to do more heavy on the proteins and less on the carbohydrates, which makes things more expensive. But so I try to keep those things in mind. But I did a couple of cheese pies, a zucchini and cheese pie, a sweet cheese pie, and had those available as both a nut type crust, a gluten-free crust, and a regular crust, so that we had options, and that those were clearly marked. And I normally try to do, again, this is me and my preference, I normally try to keep anything gluten on its own table over there, so that we're not having the cross-contamination, because otherwise you will have crumbs and stuff will happen. But I did a baked chicken with mint, which is, I've seen a sage sauce that's super great with chicken, the mint sauce. Those green sauces really tend to make great picnic chicken. I don't know why, they just do. There are super huge numbers of amazing redactions already done out there. There are recipes that you can go and do your own looking at, and I wish I had more time to talk about that and places to point you, but I think most of us already have our preferences based on on the cultures we like, and stuff. But there's just so many options. But also keeping in mind, when you're doing one of these, you need to think about simplicity of preparation. Things like sliced cucumbers, fresh cheeses, olives, apples, whatever it is that you've got. You don't want it to be a 19-step thing, because even if you're prepping it at home, making that it's tough to do it. I mean, unless you're going to invite also a fun time. Invite 9 of your friends over and cook these incredibly complex things. But keep that in mind when you're putting it together, that you're going to have this prepped. So look for fun recipes, look for recipes that will remain stable, and kind of keep it a little bit simple. So this was the rest of the thing where we had the sliced shank ham because they were on sale. Also a thing to keep in mind. A smoked chicken with lemon sauce on the side, Andalusian stuffed eggs. Oh, this was the previous year. Sorry. So these were 2 different things. So, and I did a mint limeade and a rose lemonade as well as water. And here is one I did. This one ended up more being it's an indoor feast. It was a very small event with a Roman theme, but it was a fun one. And it was also mostly stuff pre-prepped with meatballs. Meatballs are always fun to do ahead of time. Egg dishes, flatbreads, just keeping in mind all of those sorts of things. But mostly what I'm pointing out is the reason I gave some of these recipes, some of these feast menus, was to show that you can do more than we had, if you want to. Nothing says you have to, but if you want to, you can do more than we had some butter and some hard-boiled eggs and some pickles. Actually, and that's absolutely fine for a day board. That's plenty for people to eat. Just a little snack. But if you want to do a little bit more exciting, as long as it's exciting for you, you can certainly look into other things. You can do things like go through and pick your favorite book and find all the things that are going to be okay served at a middle temperature. You can kind of play around with those ideas. So, and these are the ingredients from that last slide. This was my Dayboard from the 2015, where hard-boiled eggs, they really are, people like them. Writers like having them around. Meatballs, cheese, and we just did an acid cheese on site. Crackers, a pork pasty, a mushroom pasty, sauerkraut, pickles, bread and butter, roast pork, roast chicken, some salad, shortbread cookies, because I like making shortbread cookies, and I collect shortbread molds, so I tend to make them even if they aren't the best of choices, just because they're fun. But the things that I was thinking about with this one were, one, I was just out of gastric bypass, and I wasn't really interested in cooking, so I wanted to make sure that the stuff that I did was easy and I didn't have to think about it. It needed to be very child-friendly because it was for my Toys for Tots thing. I was also the event steward for this one, but I did have help in the kitchen. I had someone who had agreed to do all of the work in the kitchen on the day of. So all I had to do was have everything prepped before, and then she took care of it all. So again, keeping in mind what your circumstances are, and then making your organization based on that. This is another one of those things where I did a theme rather than a time and a place. And I put it in for that very reason, so that you can see that there was some putting together a story works just as well as taking your story from the time and the place. Yeah, I think that's it. So we'll go back and let you. All right, are there any questions? It looks like we've got about 10 minutes left. Any other discussion? Like I said, this is mostly my experience, is just watch your food safety, organize, and keep it fun for you. Keep it stuff that you can prep ahead, that works nicely that way, and so that you can keep your stress level as low as possible. I really like prep feasts for that reason. I like knowing it's all in the bags, in the coolers. I don't have to worry about if the chicken's gonna be pink. I don't have to worry about if the bread's gonna bake, because it's already done. I already did it. I already took care of it. I already have worked through those logistics. So now I can go and I can watch the people that are eating and see their faces and see their smiles and actually appreciate the fact that they're appreciating my food, which is one reason I really like the afternoon things, because they work for my particular culture. All right, I think that's it. So thank you guys. Like I said, when I post this on the Artemisian channel, I will also post a link to the presentation. Yes, definitely. Medieval Cookery, Good Cookery, all of those amazing sites, places to look. All right. Thank you guys for showing up. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prax.